Welcome to CoMotion Labs Fundamentals for Startups. I'm Ashley Espon, Senior Manager with CoMotion Labs. While we wait for everyone to log in, I'll make a few announcements. Next week, Jennifer Olson, Principal HR Consulting Practice at One Digital, will present the People Leadership 101, Fostering a Solid Foundation for Success. All of our Fundamentals for Startup presentations are archived on our CoMotion website under Innovation Training Videos. We have covered a variety of topics over the past several years, so if you find yourself with some free time, check out our past talks. For a full schedule and to register for future Fundamentals, please visit bit.ly/CoMotion Fundamentals. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell. Fundamentals for Startups is funded in part by a grant from the Economic Development Agency. We will be dropping a link in the chat to a short survey. Please tell us who you are, where you're watching, and how you heard about this event. This will help us report back to continue the funding. This year, we are proud to partner with Bluetooth to support the Fundamentals for Startups program. See how Bluetooth audio sharing is poised to once again change the way you will experience audio and connect with the world around you.
Bluetooth introduced the world to wireless audio. Calling, listening, watching, making us safer, more productive, more joyful.
1 minute left.
It's part of the fabric of our lives. Now, Bluetooth will bring us even closer to each other and our world with audio sharing. It will let us share with others our music, our experiences, listening and watching together. The places we go will share with us, enriching our experiences, helping us hear our world. Breaking down barriers between interests, cultures, generations. Introducing Bluetooth audio sharing. Closer together.
Go ahead.
Today, Tamina Watson, immigration attorney and founder of Watson Immigration Law in Seattle, will present the Immigration Options for Startups, Current Laws and New Developments. Tamina has helped hundreds of individuals and American businesses navigate the complexities of the U.S. immigration laws to unite loved ones and talent. She is a passionate advocate for immigration reform and author of 2 books, The Startup Visa, Key to Job Growth and Economic Prosperity in America and Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. Her second edition Startup Visa book just launched in July of 2021. With over 15 years of experience as a practitioner and business owner and as an immigrant from the UK to the US with Bangladeshi heritage, she is also able to help her clients with empathy and excellence. She regularly advises policymakers and think tanks, speaks at conferences, and has been publishing articles since 2008. A recipient of several awards, Tamina has recently named one of the 2020 Puget Sound Business Journal Women of Influence. Tamina will take all questions via the chat. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and I'll now turn it over to Tamina.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you to CoMotion for having me. I am so honored and grateful for this opportunity to share some knowledge with your audience. I am Tamina Watson, as Ashley mentioned. I want to point you to a few things before we just get started. Our law firm was named as one of the top tech startup immigration lawyers by Business Insider a few weeks ago, so I wanted to make sure you knew that. I have a column. Every 2 weeks I write a column for Above the Law, which is a national legal magazine. Find me there for information about what's going on at the moment on immigration. I'm also a contributor for Entrepreneur magazine, so you'll find me there writing about startup and entrepreneur issues that is very relevant to this audience. My book, The Startup Visa, I have another slide to show that in a minute, is the Startup Visa, and I think you'll find it very informative, particularly after this particular presentation. And I do have a podcast called Tamina Talks Immigration, which I think you will find useful as well. When we launched the book, The Startup Visa, in July, as Ashley mentioned, and thank you so much, Ashley, we had a podcast series to go with it. And as we talk throughout this presentation today, you'll hear about a lot of visas, but not the startup visa. It's because we don't have one. So as part of the podcast series, we created one called the Startup Visa series. And a lot of leading authorities on the matter in the United States and outside the United States have spoken about why the startup visa is important. And they talk a lot about the people like you who are listening today. So I think you'll find it useful. And it's Tamina Talks Immigration on iTunes and everywhere else. And the book is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and everywhere else. And one of the things about the book is there is a chapter that addresses all of the visa categories that I will be going through. And a lot of problems are addressed in those. You can look at that chapter and understand those problems to make sure your strategy for your visa is addressed that way, because that's how you will find the most use out of it. So today, what are we covering? We're going to be covering what's happening right now in immigration, just as a whole. I'm going to put a lot of time into the new option that has just become available for entrepreneurs, international entrepreneurs, and it's called the International Entrepreneur Program. And then I will talk about the other visa categories that have existed since, immigration really began in this form since the 50s and got reformed in the 90s. So what are the current state of affairs? So what happened, as you may all know, wherever you are in the world, you could not have escaped the news cycle that was going on regarding immigration. So over the last 4 years, a lot of the immigration policies in this country were restricted, particularly in high-skilled immigration. So you might have heard that H1Bs were being denied, a lot of requests for evidence were being issued for various visa categories. And there were eventually in the during the COVID era, as it began, there were lots of bans that happened that were visa-specific bans, not just country bans. And I'm happy to say those visa bans have been lifted. The country bans will be lifted on November 8th. So wherever you are in the world, particularly if you're in South Africa, Brazil, India, Europe, you probably couldn't come in even if you had a visa. So that ban is going to be lifted on November 8th. And so you should be able to travel so long as you are complying with the vaccine regulations and requirements. In terms of immigration as a whole, when this administration came into office, the system was already broken, and it was further hindered by the COVID issues that we faced. So from about March to October 2020, all of the immigration offices within the United States were closed. So various activities that need to happen in green card applications, work permit applications were stalled. I'm happy to say they have restarted, but they are very, very slow. So if you are somebody who is in the immigration process, know that you are not alone. You just have to have a lot of patience. So anybody who's listening, just know that whatever you file and whatever you hear throughout this presentation, you will have to understand that things are slower than usual. Now, the COVID delays are part of it, and the Immigration Service is working to make sure that they can get back to speeding things up, but it's still taking some time. So just wanted to make sure you all took that information before we started speaking about this. Now, I really want to spend a significant amount of time talking about the new option that is now available for international entrepreneurs. Who should be considering this? It's people who have co-founders that are from different countries in the United States. Or if you are a founder in another country as part of the CoMotion community and are trying to come in, this particular rule is for you. We don't have a startup visa yet. There is a bill pending in Congress at the moment. It's called the Like Act. If you are interested in learning about it, I have a blog on Watson immigration law. You can, type in startup visa and you'll be able to learn some of it. The entrepreneur parole, it is part of regulation. It is not part of a statute. It was put in place by President Obama. It was put aside by the previous administration, and then President Biden revived it in May this year. So as of May, people can file this. But because it's so new, people don't know enough about it. Now, parole means people are coming here with permission to be here. It is not a visa. When you file this application, it is not going to be quick as well. When you hear everything I say, what you want to pay attention to is what are the requirements and what are the evidence. And the catchphrase I like to tell all my clients is, show me the money. It's very much like Jerry Maguire, because the government wants to know, are you going to create jobs in this country? And are you going to be able to benefit the economy here? We have a very handy frequently asked questions document on our website, and I will make sure Ashley has that by the end of this presentation so she can share it. So please keep an eye out for that. So what is the rule? The rule is for companies that are going to have a substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. That's what you are. As a startup, that is what your goal is. They are targeting you. They have created this rule to show that a company, and they've defined what a startup is, a company that was created within the last 5 years or was created within the last 5 years of receiving a grant. The company must have been created in the United States. And all of you that are here, particularly part of the CoMotion community, you likely have an entity here. That's what they want. They do want to see that this business has that potential to grow. And this is where a business plan is going to be your best friend. So what kind of evidence do you need for this? You need operational agreements, certificate of incorporation, bylaws. You do need to show that you have an office space. Immigration in the United States hasn't sort of caught up to remote working. Currently, and particularly in the last 18 months, we've had a lot of issues as immigration lawyers in advising our clients about remote work. But typically, you walk away from this conversation knowing you have to show an office space. A WeWorks could work, a shared space, but you want to lease. So that's the type of evidence you need. One of the things that I'll throw out there for you is that you may or may not have seen this TV show called Silicon Valley. And I love telling my clients, go watch that, because that startup founder is my typical client. This brilliant person who is trying to solve a huge problem, but doesn't really have a clue about, I need paperwork to even raise money. I need paperwork to even understand what my rules are for my business. So everything that you have to do for your startup is what I would need as an immigration lawyer. And those paperworks become the foundation of the application. Now, the government is looking at who will qualify as an entrepreneur, and they're describing you, somebody who is well positioned. So you are a founder or somebody who has made a lasting contribution to this particular business. They want to know that you can advance that startup, and they want you to show that you have at least 10% of equity in your startup. And that's a very important requirement, because as you raise funds, you're going to lose some of your shares because it's going to be diluted. So they want to know that you have at least 10%. But when you renew your application, and even if you have to give up some shares, you must have at least 5% at any given time on this particular parole. And then central and active role, and I will talk about that. So evidence for ownership. They want to see cap tables. They want to see equity certificates, operating agreements, organizational documents. How do you prove that you have a central role? In addition to the ownership documents, you may have media reports saying how wonderful your company's doing, how much money you've raised, how much you might have invitation letters to talk about pitching your idea. Your business plan will definitely outline who are the people in your business. So think about the evidence to show that you are part of this organization and what role you play. Now, the government will be looking at what kind of investment your company has raised. There are two types of investments: capital from angel investors or venture capitalists, or accelerators. And the other type of investment can be an award or a grant. Particularly in the CoMotion community, a lot of you are coming out of universities, you are in research and development, you might have received awards and grants. You can absolutely use those. Now, the question is, who is an investor that will qualify for this particular role? Now, anybody who's dealt with immigration in the United States will know you need a sponsor, whether they're sponsoring your visa or what have you. In the parole, there's no sponsor necessarily, but you do need a qualified investor who sort of acts as that. And so the qualified investor must have invested at least $250,000. Now, it could be one investor, it could be a combination. But for each person that is investing, the government wants to know that they know what they're doing. They're making informed decisions about you are worth it. And so they want to see that the investor has invested at least $600,000 over the last 5 years. And they have created at least in two entities as well, and that they have generated, those two entities have generated at least $500,000 in revenue or 5 full-time jobs. And all of these will be in the frequently asked questions. You can also find it in the entrepreneur article I wrote, but these requirements are absolutely compulsory. And anybody who's investing in you will likely have had these before. It's documenting that evidence is where the time will go. The investment that you will receive must have been in the last 18 months. And it can be other forms of what startups normally do, convertible notes, that sort of agreement. It doesn't have to be necessarily money in the bank immediately, but they want to see everything that happens in the startup world is what is being adhered to. Now, the evidence, again, organizational structures, they have to be US citizens or green card holders. And so they want to see that the organization, if it's a venture capital organization, is owned by US or controlled by US citizens or green card holders. If it's an angel investor, they want to see it's a green card holder or a US investment. When it comes to previous investments by these investors, they need to go into their portfolio and find the documents that I just mentioned, that they have invested in company A and B. Those companies have created jobs. This is tricky to get because obviously when an investor is going to their portfolios and asking other owners and startup founders to share documents, it becomes a little difficult. We are working as a group, a number of us lawyers, to see what we can do to make this a little easier. But until then, you are stuck with the rules as they are. But one of the things that we think will work is having affidavits from the investors to confirm and notarize, swear on oath that we have actually done this. But if you do that, know that the government has an opening to ask questions and ask for more documents. Now, what I will say is that the Entrepreneur Parole Program is very new. In the entire country, only one has been approved so far, and maybe about 50 to 100 have been filed. So we are still waiting for data from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services to see what kind of questions they're going to be asking going forward. But you as an applicant must take away from this conversation that you should do everything you can do to get every single type of documents the government is looking for. Now, what kind of grant will qualify? They want to see it is an award for economic development from a federal, state, or local government. It cannot be a contract for goods and services that look like an award. And if you are somebody who has done that, you'll know what that looks like. But it has to be a grant and award for a startup. And that minimum can be 100,000. It doesn't have to be 250,000. How do you prove it? The letter and the grant that awards you this particular privilege, the confirmation issuance, bank records showing that the money has landed in your account, but also maybe a copy of the check. Evidence is everything. As a lawyer, I tell my clients that you can say that your hair is red, but honestly, if you don't have a photo, it doesn't exist. So evidence is like that for every type of immigration question that we ask you. We cannot just say you're brilliant. We have to prove it. Now, one of the things that we will hear, and a lot of you might be thinking, is that, well, what if I don't raise the $250,000? Can I still qualify? And the government has left an opening for it. They have said that, yes, you could qualify if you could prove that you've raised a substantial amount. And we don't know, we don't have a definition of what substantial is, but you know, you're close to the 250,000, but not quite there. And you can prove that you have a reliable and compelling startup that will provide significant public benefit. Because with an amount that's even less than $200,000, there are startups that have created jobs that exceed 10 full-time jobs, that have already generated revenue in the thousands and even often in 6 digits. So if you are one of those people, you could prove that you're still worth it. You know, it's interesting. I've developed all these catchphrases just from watching television that, you know, the L'Oreal ad that everybody's watched around the world, you know, you are worth it. You have to prove you are worth it if you haven't quite met the bar that the government is looking at. So that's the kind of evidence that we would need. And the social impact, the national impact, the positive impact on the regional, anything else that you can beg to say, give me a shot, please, because my idea is worth it. Now, how do I prove that I will provide significant public benefit to the United States? That is a key phrase that the regulation provided that the government could hang their hat on for this program. So it is very much about significant public benefit. And so if any of you know about O visas and E visas, and I will obviously touch on those, it's proving that you're so good at what you do. So you can have, you know, brag. This is your brag session about you and your company. So you want to be able to show the letters that you have received from investors or any panels that you've spoken on. You have judged, you know, various things perhaps. Patents, often in the tech world, you are always patenting things. So let's have some of those to look at. Often it's good to have reports to show there is a gap in the market. This is a problem. This is a void. I am solving it. You have to think outside the box. You cannot be doing what other people are doing, or your friend has done something that works. You could just build on that. What else can I show? But public benefit is also the payroll that maybe for the jobs you've already created, payroll taxes and pay stubs, and of course the business plan. It is just such a crucial aspect of any new business that is trying to get an immigration benefit, but media reports. And so, you know, having a PR company that works with you and a communications team as part of your startup really will pay dividends for all the things that you need to do for any of the visa categories that I'm about to talk about, not just this. But in this entrepreneur program, you do need to have a salary, like every single visa category that will be in this discussion. And it wants to see that you are going to have an income that is 400% above the poverty guideline. So that means if you are in a family of 3, your income sort of needs to be above $80,000. And that is not unreasonable in Seattle, Washington, but often, you know, that is something where people will be struggling with. And that's where we, you know, obviously we can have a discussion on how you do that. But this salary issue comes up in every context, whether it's H1B, whether it's an L, but the numbers are often a little bit, you can be a little bit lower in the E and the L situation. But in the entrepreneur program, you have to, it's a square peg, square hole. You have to meet that. But it can be a combination of your spouse's income. Now, one of the benefits of the entrepreneur program is that your spouse, if you are married, will be allowed to work in the US. Now, that is a huge benefit because a lot of immigration visas do not give the spouses the work permission, particularly in the H1B context that I will cover in a moment. But we can come back to that if you want to, but just remember that this is one of the issues that you will have to talk about right at the beginning of your strategy. Now, how do you apply? And I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I have a lot of other visa categories to talk about. But on the USCIS website, there is a new form that has been created just for this, and it's called a Form 941. There is a filing fee that is significantly higher than other visa categories, and it's $1,200. You will have to pay a biometrics fee of $85. And this biometrics will be done at the US consulates as well, if you are not in the United States. When you come into the US, you will get 2.5 years. And when you get to the end of that 2.5 years, you can renew it for another 2.5 years if you can meet the various requirements of showing how much the jobs that you've created and further funding. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, one of the things that will happen is, as you all know, particularly the CoMotion community, that when you have a startup, it's not just one person. Typically, there are 3 people, the CTO, CEO, and CFO, but it could be a combination of others. But you might have more than one international co-founder. If that happens, you're in luck, because with this entrepreneur program, at least 3 co-founders can benefit. One of the questions that is addressed in these regulations is, what if you're denied? You have to file again, you cannot appeal. And if you have a spouse, there is a separate form to file for the spouse. And if you want to travel, there's a different travel form. The government will say, and I'm going to skip some of these because I have so much material to cover, but do know that if anything changes in your startup, particularly if you own less than 5% equity, you may not be able to keep this permission to stay here. You could lose the parole if you do that, and if the government thinks there is anything derogatory about you, particularly if you commit a crime or something like that. Now, to renew the program, you have the parole, you have to show the government that you have raised an additional $500,000 and you have generated, so this is an and, not an or, you have generated $500,000 or you've created 5 full-time jobs. Okay, so there are renewal requirements. And if you don't meet the requirements, then you have to go back to I'm worth it and use that argument with all sorts of reliable and compelling evidence. Now, that's the Entrepreneur Parole Program, International Entrepreneur Program. That's what it's being called. It's very new. There are not a lot of processing times that the government has given us. But so when you file it, we can't really tell you how long it will take. It could take several months. And so that is going to be one of the things that you discuss in your strategy session with your lawyer, about which program is the best one for me. And one of the things that you will put into your considerations is timing, because if an investor's put money into your startup, they will want you here pretty soon. And so what I will leave the entrepreneur program discussion with is, if this is something that is important to you, and your startup and your investors, it's important to write to the administration saying, hey, this is a really important program. We love it, but you have to put some timelines on this because we want to know when our founders are coming here. So advocacy plays a big part of this whole immigration process, but particularly for that new one. So if anybody's interested in advocacy, please reach out, and I would love to give you some guidance because it's imperative. Now I'm going to move on to something called an L1 visa. If you are in the audience in this community, CoMotion community, and you're outside the United States, you may already have a company that is active and operating. If that's the case, you might be wanting to transfer to the United States and expand your business into the United States. And this is a very common visa. Often we will work with our clients from around the world, and they will use this to have a branch of their company in the US to just do the same work. It doesn't have to be the same type of work because sometimes companies pivot, but this visa is an important one in the startup world. So this visa is to come and work in the United States, but you do have to have an established entity outside the US, and you must have worked outside the US for at least 1 year out of the last 3 years. The evidence we need for that are 12 months of pay stubs. At our office, we make it a compulsory protocol to have at least 18 months of pay stubs if you've worked for more than that time. It can be for a co-founder, an executive, or a manager. And the corporate structure is incredibly important. You can be a subsidiary or a parent. You know, let's call Joe Blogs LLC in Argentina. As for, you know, that's the thing that's coming to mind. Oh, and then you have Joe Blogs LLC, Argentina's branch in the US. So it can be a parent subsidiary, or it could be an affiliate. It's a term of art in the immigration world. It's an affiliate, not like you're selling things and you have an affiliation, but it's more like you have similar ownership. So the definition is same or similar ownership. And this can become tricky when you have multiple owners, and not everybody wants to come in the US and they don't always have the same ownership, or you have investors who have gotten some of the shares. So how do you show that? So this is where I often work with corporate lawyers to make sure that the structure, which is the foundation of this particular visa category, meets the L1 requirements. And if you, as I mentioned, you have to work for the foreign company for at least 1 year out of the last 5 years, 3 years. Now, this application process has to also be filed in the United States. And I show my clients my 5 fingers. I show them that you have to prepare your application with these 5 requirements, that you have an active and operating business outside the US, and that all the types of documents I previously mentioned in the parole section, the entity, the tax returns, the lease, you know, you have invoices and bank statements. You have to show the same for the US company that is active and operating. You have licenses, tax filings, payroll taxes, and of course, these two become the circle to show the corporate structure. You have to also show that you're the manager and executive. And you have to show that there are people who you are managing. If you're an executive, the corporate structure of all the people in the business. And so that becomes the 3rd finger. And you have to give them job descriptions, not of yourself only, but also of the people that you are managing. The 4th finger is the same for the United States, that you will be doing the managing and the executive nature of work in the US, and there will be people assisting you, who those people are. And the last one is everything about you. If you are the founder, the executive, the manager, we want your resume, your pay stubs, any reference letters. We want to show that you can do this job. So it's all about the evidence. We file it in the United States. When it is approved, it is sent to the embassy. At the embassy, you will then go for a visa application, and they will hopefully give you the visa stamp to arrive. Now, if you are already in the US, and it does happen, you can change your status if you want, but there are many things to consider, and I won't necessarily lose time to talk about that, but just know that you can change your status in the US in the right circumstances. I want to touch on this visa because it's very important for those who are startup founders but do not have companies abroad already to utilize the L visa, and maybe the parole doesn't work for them. The E1 and E2, these are treaty trader and treaty investor visas. What is a treaty? The United States has commercial treaties, treaties of commerce with many countries, not all, but the countries that have the treaties will allow the citizens to come here on these treaty visas. Now, the E1 is trading, you're trading between two countries. The investor is you're investing in the United States. So it is a work visa to come in the US. It does not lead to a green card directly, but you can have this work visa for as long as you have the business and it's profitable and you're working. So there have been people in the United States who've been here for 20 plus years on the E2 visa. It's important to know that your spouse can actually work. Actually, the spouse could work on the L visa that I didn't mention. And your children up to 21 can be with you, which is the same for any work visa, actually. For the E2, and that's the one that most people use, the E2 is where people have to actually show they've invested money and their money is at risk. And they have to show the money came directly to the business. The government wants to know how you earned the money or saved it, maybe, how the money arrived in the US, and they want to see that the money is at risk, which really means that you've spent a significant amount of the money. So one of the questions that people ask me is, how much is the right amount? What is substantial? The government doesn't, the laws do not stipulate how much money needs to be invested. It says substantial. Substantial really means a significant amount that is proportionate to that business. Proportionate is also in the laws about this, the regulations. And proportionate means it is the right amount of money for that type of business. So if you are buying a grocery store, it could be $70,000. But if you are building a hotel, it's many hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions. So that's what it means to be proportionate investment. But the rule of thumb generally is about $100,000. And so when you're investing this $100,000, you do need to show that you've spent a significant amount of it. So we ask our clients to keep a spreadsheet of every penny they're spending on research and development, on travel, on meetings, on, all the meals that they're, spending to ask, investors. And it's not just the common sense ones where you are investing in the lease and the mortgage or whatever you're doing to get the venue, but all the things that you're spending just to get there. So that's how you can get to the risk. So we want to make sure that our clients spend as much as they can and to keep a pot of money in the bank to show that they've got a significant amount to just get them going until revenue generates. Now, this application process, the paperwork is very similar to all the things I've already talked about. They're just organized differently. But the biggest challenge in this one is the source and the path of the funds. Where we often spend a lot of time on our E2s is clients will say, well, I just sold a house and that's how I got the 100,000. But often in different countries, the money is not quite on the table. And so even though they've told us they've got the 100,000 that way, we can't really show the source. We also can't show how the path came here, because some countries have restrictions on how much money they can send out of the country. So there are lots of strategies to consider. And this is where in the E2 context, you often have to spend a lot of time. But this type of application will also have to show that you are coming here to direct and operate a business. So often I will tell my clients the example of a restaurant owner. When you are a restaurant owner, you are HR, PR, you are talking to the vendors and the suppliers, all of those things. You're not just serving food. If you are just serving food, you are not directing and operating the business. Just like any startup founder. And again, go back and look at the Silicon Valley TV show. At some point, I might have to tag team with them somehow. It's just occurring to me to say so. But it's really important to know that when you are the founder and the director of a business, you're doing everything. The government just wants to know and see that on paper. You're not going out of your way to show something that doesn't exist. Now, when you're filing this application for the E2, generally speaking, you want to file this at the embassy. That is the best way to do it, because the embassy looks at these applications from the start. They make the actual ruling for these cases, and the embassy will give you the visa stamp. You can change your status in the US. This is something that I generally caution my clients about, because you do not get a visa stamp when you do this. And the embassy doesn't rubber stamp it like they would for an L or an entrepreneur parole or something else. They do look at it with fresh eyes, and they can deny it. But if you file it in the US and you are somebody who's to travel internationally a lot, which we see with our clients, filing at the embassy is the best way forward for you. Again, your spouse can apply that way too, and your children can get an E2. Now, H1B is something that is very important, and it's one of the most important work visas in this country. And a lot of people in the CoMotion community might be familiar with it and might be wondering, why can't I get this as a self-employed startup? So I'm going to walk you through this about why this is important, how you can get over the startup challenges. So it is the workhorse, so to speak, of US work visas. The start date is in tandem with the fiscal year. So October 1st is when this visa starts. You can apply in April, which is 6 months in advance, and then it goes through a lottery. So all the other visas that I've spoken about so far, you can file anytime in the year. But H1B has a very specific timeline, and you have to fit that timeline. You must have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. You must have an employer, and the employer files, not you. And I'll talk about the self-employed in a minute. And you must have a prevailing wage, a salary. And this wage is defined by the Department of Labor's guidelines. Once you have gotten into this lottery, you can go from company A to B to C, and that's generally called porting, and the maximum time for this is 6 years. The employment description is one of the most important parts of an H1B. Are you doing a job that requires the education, the learning that you have done through your degree program? And they want to see a very close nexus. In the last 4 years, as I mentioned, as we started, there were a lot of requests for evidence and denials. A lot of denials and questions came mostly for H1B visas, because the government said your degree doesn't match the job. Now, anybody who is in the tech world would know that you can do a lot of different jobs as a computer science degree holder. But the government kept coming back saying, well, you know, you've got information management degree, does this work for a software developer? So there are a lot of things to consider in the H1B world. So take away from this conversation the timeline, the salary, the degree, and making sure that you work with a lawyer very closely on all of these issues. Now, when you are a startup, this is where I want to spend a little bit of time with the CoMotion community. When you are a startup, you can be self-employed or an owner, but you have to show that the business controls your work. Now, how do you do that in a startup? You will likely have co-founders. And when you're a third and a third and a third, you can show that the CEO is controlling your work. If you are the CEO, you likely had an advisory board of a board of directors. You can show that the board of directors they have the authority to hire, fire, and supervise you. And so that's where the startup issue comes in for H1B visas. Now, I do want you to know about the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Program. This is a coalition that was formed in 2013. And I want to give a shout out to two people. Their names are Craig Montori. He is the executive director of the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Coalition. I want to give a shout out to Brad Feld. He is a renowned author, venture capital investor, who was also, I'm very honored and proud to say, the forward author of my book, The Startup Visa, but also somebody called Jeff Busgang. They had formed Global Entrepreneur in Residence Program. And what it does, there is something called cap exempt H1B. So I talked about the lottery. Now, if you are working for a non-profit or a higher education institution, if you work for a higher education institution, you are not part of the lottery, because the education institution by itself inherently is training people. And so you are not part of the lottery. If you are a non-profit that has an affiliation with a higher education institution, like a lot of hospitals and legal clinics, medical clinics, health clinics that are training residents and newer medical professionals, they can get H1Bs without being in the lottery. So the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Coalition utilizes the CAP exempt program by giving an opportunity for startup founders to be employed by a university, but also work on their startups so that it can use any one of these visas we just talked about, but also have a simultaneous H1B on the side. So that's an important thing to think about. If it becomes applicable to you, I would be happy to elaborate on that for you. But I'm mindful of the time, so I want to keep moving on to keep talking about the other options you need to talk about. Now, if you, the O visa is a great visa. If you have already utilized your time in an accelerator, you have done so well that you have had publicity, you have cracked the code in something new, and you have had a lot of attention from the media. This visa could be for you. So the government wants to see that you have met 3 of these various requirements below, that you have had a national or international award. You are a member of an association that has exclusive membership, but it doesn't have to be exclusive necessarily. The government wants to see what are the bylaws to be part of this association. The government wants to see the media reports about you. And the way that I describe this is, let's talk about David Beckham for a second. You know, I'm from the United Kingdom, and even though I'm not a soccer fan, people understand that David Beckham is a great soccer personality. So when they're writing about David Beckham, the news articles should say, well, he scored, look at that kick, not, oh yes, he's a great looking guy. You know, it's really about your work and how good that work is. So when there's a media report, how well your startup is doing, what a brilliant, talented person you are, that's what we want to see. So if you have something else on the side that has had media attention, that may or may not be sufficient. So you have to talk about the strategies of how you present how great you are. Now, if you have been part of a panel, worked as a judge, those will work. If you have had peer-reviewed articles, if you have contributed to different types of newspapers. So this is where you can talk about the amazing idea you have and why it needs to change, write op-eds. And then you are part of this startup and have a critical role. And in the past, you have commanded high salaries. So you only need to meet 3 of them, not all of them. But this is an important category to keep in mind if you can utilize this and all the others don't work. Now, other visa categories I want to touch on are TN visas. If you are from Mexico or Canada, you have a special privilege. You cannot actually be a self-employed founder in this, but if you're a tech startup, you should know that this is a great category to use to get workers into the US for you. But there is a definition also of who is a self-employed person. If you own less than 50%, you can show that you're not necessarily being controlled by your owner. So there are some strategies to talk about if you have some equity, but I won't go into that in depth right now. The other visa that I talk about a lot is the H3 visa and the J1 visa. These are both training visas so that people can learn their craft that they wouldn't be able to learn in their home country. So oftentimes accelerators can use this visa category. Incubators can use this. But if you are a tech startup, you could potentially consider this because I'm so sorry, that was my timer. Because I think it's important for you to know that you can bring in workers who could help you in a different country when you expand to learn how this business is running. But there are a lot of things to know about this, and you have to show that there are no American workers that you're displacing. In the recent requests that we've seen, the government has been trying to make sure you're not displacing an American worker. Now, if you're somebody outside the United States, you can come here on a B1 visa for meetings, setting up office. So that's something to utilize and understand, but you cannot get paid in the US. Very, very important to understand that. I won't talk about the EB5 program. We're running out of time, but know that if you have a lot of money to invest in your company and you want to get a green card, it could be something to think about. You can follow us at Watson Immigration Law at our blog. I've put the link there. You can follow me at Twitter. You can connect on LinkedIn. Again, Entrepreneur Magazine and Above the Law. And of course, email works. So I want to make sure that you have ways to keep on top of all the news. And of course, the book will be very, very handy. So Ashley, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover.
Absolutely. That was a great and very informative talk. We actually have quite a few questions, so apologies in advance if we can't get to yours. I'll just kick off with the first question. I'm an international student and I have just received a grant. What should I consider?
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, congratulations. If you are in the US and you have received your grant, you should absolutely consider the entrepreneur program. In the past, this didn't exist and it didn't give a pathway for people who had grants. So congratulations. And I would love to be able to help you if you want to talk more. So email me about that.
Awesome. Our next question is from online, Jeff Zika. Can you explain the process for hiring foreign national graduates, and can foreign national graduates do gig work before they find full-time work?
Really good question. The answer is no about gig work. If you are working in the United States, you must always have work permission. And the work permission can only be received by any number of the visas I talked about. So it's a circular discussion on that. But if you are trying to hire a foreign international student who's graduated, you really do have to look through all these visa categories. But the typical pathway is OPT, H1B, green card. And if they are from, I didn't mention the E3 visa, you want to look at what country they're from. If they're from Mexico or Canada, or if they're from Australia, you might be able to bypass the H1B visa completely.
Awesome. This question comes from Mike Murphy. Is it expected that an applicant is still outside the US while they're applying, or is it possible they are in the US on a student visa or OPT?
Really good question. This is where the change of status discussion comes in. Status is the visa category they're under, and whether they can change it to whatever visa they can be on, given all the numbers that visa categories I talked about. You work with what you have. I tell my clients I'm as good as my case. If your client is outside, if my client is outside the country, you can still apply for them. The difficulty we've seen is really getting the visa appointments at the embassy. The embassies need to give a stamp in their passport to let them come in, and that's where a lot of delays are coming up. But I am actually talking soon on an immigration panel to talk about how do we get them in if they're outside. If that is recorded, I'll make sure that we post links, so keep on top of the LinkedIn post that I share.
Awesome. And this one also comes from Mike as a follow-up. So it's assumed, so it's assumed you're in the US while working on H1B and you want to leave your job to launch a startup, or is your income in the country, or is it the income that you are coming from? One second. So it is assumed you are in the US working on an H1B and you want to leave your job to launch a startup, or this is your income in the country you are coming from. Maybe that doesn't make as much sense.
Let me just try to think about what he's trying to say.
Okay.
So If you are already on an H1B, because I see this question all the time, and say, I'm working for one of the large Fortune 500 companies here, I really want to start my own company, can I do this on an H1B? The answer is yes, you can. But at the beginning, you may not have the salary that is necessary to show in the H1B context. So often we will say you've got to capitalize your own business before you can even seek your funding. It's a catch-22 sometimes, but if you can put the money in your startup and draw your salary from there, that becomes your company B. You got on in the lottery. You're now going from company A to B, and maybe it's company C. But it is possible, and this is where the self-employed H1B issues that I mentioned. You do need to have people that you can show are controlling your work.
Awesome. This one comes from online. What about if you are in the DACA program? Are there any laws in creating a company that has had some investments?
You know, that's a really good question. Now, the DACA community is a very important category for the United States immigration discussions. If you are a DACA recipient and you have a work permit, you're free to work anywhere you want, including your company. What comes up as a discussion is whether your investor wants to know more about your stability here. And if you are one of those people, I would love to chat with you about how you convince your investor, because that's where advocacy comes in again. Right this minute, as we speak, Congress is talking about the reconciliation bill about immigration, which is, immigration is part of that discussion. So advocacy and immigration unfortunately go hand in hand. And oftentimes I have to press my clients to do some of these things. Otherwise, we can't get past go.
Absolutely. A question from the room. What financial or legal commitments does a company make when they sponsor someone with an H1B visa?
Such a good question. So the H1B program has a prerequisite requirement to promise as a company you will pay the salary that has been prescribed. So if you are an entry-level computer analyst, you're probably getting $70,000 a year in Seattle. If you're entry-level in New York, you're getting $90,000. If you're entry-level in Kansas, you're getting $50,000. Whatever that prescribed salary is, you are promising as a company to pay that. You cannot have them sitting on the side because there's no money. Whether you have money or not, and as a business owner, I think about this often, you've got to pay your employees, and the government is banking on that and holding you to that. And that's the promise you're making.
Another question from the room. My co-founders and I have an early stage startup. We are having a really tough time recruiting engineering talent, but we're opening to hiring internationally. Any suggestions on strategies and how to help our company stand out?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. And it is a very common question. You really do need to go through this visa soup I talked about. But often these countries that I mentioned, Mexico, Canada, and Australia, you don't have the H1B cap that I talked about where you're doing the April, October issue. If you are going to give any equity to people, and it's 10%, maybe you can consider the entrepreneur program. But you've got to have your own immigration strategy. But this very question is something I hear all the time.
Awesome. We have time probably this last question. I want to extend an offer to an engineer who has been working in the US on an H1B for almost 5 years. Her current employer is sponsoring her for an EB5 green card, and our startup wants to hire her as a senior engineer. What happens to her green card processes? Can we take it over?
I would love to talk about this at a second session sometime, because this is a very long conversation. But what you will find with that particular H1B founder, H1B worker, is when this person is trying to go to company B or C, they're saying, well, look, my 6 years is going to be up soon. How do you help me stay here, help you? And the green card application is paramount because it allows, there are various stages in it, depending on where you are on the stage, in those stages, you can move to company B and C as long as they promise to do the same thing again. But whoever's filing the first green card, depending on these stages that I can't get into because of time reasons, they will probably able to go to your company. But if all of those stars align, you could easily hire them on the H1B, because you don't have to wait for the April-October timeline anymore, because they've already gone past that. And then you have to have an immigration strategy. We face this all the time, because the clock starts ticking when it becomes the fourth year on the H1B. So feel free to reach out if this is something you need to talk about in more depth.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So, all right, everyone, that's all we have time for, actually. We've taken up all of the time, which is great. Thank you all for joining us today. And a big thank you to Tamina for sharing her wisdom with the group. We appreciate it. As a reminder, next Friday at noon, we'll be hearing from Jennifer Olson, who will present People Leadership 101, Fostering a Solid Foundation for Success. Sign up for that, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
Thank you.